Welcome to my September 2025 essay, What's in an Institution? Not like what's inside it, more like what's in a name? What's in an institution? What are institutions? What do institutions look like around the world? What is circus's relationship to institution? What is movement's relationship to institution? Since the early 2000s, circus education and show development in the USA has carved out a strange and fascinating little ecosystem. Dance, theater, and music have highly structured pipelines and institutions, as well as a long history of philanthropic support. But circus in the United States has thrived despite, or maybe because of, a lack of centralized authorities like this. The past 2 decades have seen a surge in circus schools, youth programs, professional training centers, and yet the community has consistently resisted any kind of central hub. Perhaps this resistance is a natural byproduct of the multidisciplinary nature of the form. After all, the individual disciplines are increasingly internally organized. Partner and Dance Acro have their own festivals and competitions. Aerial Arts has competitions and recognized authorities. The International Jugglers Association and the World Juggling Association gather juggling and flow folks together. And many regular movement schools offer an increasingly broad set of movement disciplines for both kids and adults. So it's possible that the resistance to a circus organization is not just about disparate disciplines failing to connect with each other, but more of a reflection of circus culture itself. A culture that's built on experimentation, hybridity, and the idea that nobody should have the authority to dictate to us what circus is supposed to look like. The story of American circus education since the 2000s, then, is really a story about how an art form preserves its anarchic spirit in a world that is increasingly obsessed with codification, and the ways in which the heritage circus in the United States has interacted with the inevitable expansion of what was previously secret circus knowledge. The links, or lack thereof, between circus education and the professional sector provide a fascinating example of the organic, but perhaps inefficient, lack of a central hub defining circus values, aesthetics, or training principles. While the lack of a hub is the defining feature of the American circus, it also means that circus culture has been more easily subsumed by mainstream cultures like competition dance, gymnastics, or fitness. The more you zoom out, the more complex this picture becomes. We are in the middle of a generational handoff in the United States. Many of the American companies founded in the late 80s or early 2000s, Circus Smirkus, Sanka, the San Francisco Circus Center, the American Youth Circus Organization, Circus Juventus, Sailor Circus, Wise Fool, Circus Steam, all of these are just examples of the types of companies I'm talking about. They are all either transitioning into new ownership, have long since reorganized away from their founders, or they are beginning to struggle with what their legacy might look like. The great reshuffling that followed COVID only accelerated this process, and the economic and political climate has been unstable enough that both families and foundations are being cautious with their money. Some of these programs closed, others pivoted kind of awkwardly, but across the board, we've started to see the fault lines in leadership pipelines. The generation of circus kids who grew up in these schools never really imagined themselves as teachers or administrators. They are passionate, yes, but many treat coaching or administrating as a side gig while they pursue performing or a more traditional career. Very few pictured themselves as founders or leaders in a larger ecosystem. The earlier wave of teaching artists, my generation really, or maybe the generation before me, were raised in the buoyant myth of the 1980s and 1990s that anyone could and maybe should become an artist or a performer. That promise curdled into disillusionment in the late 2000s as the costs of higher education soared and the economy simultaneously crashed, pushing many of us into skepticism about formalized arts training. We hopped on the anti-college and especially anti-arts college train. That cultural memory is shaping the current moment. The field needs leaders, but the people available for leadership often carry an ambivalence about the very institutions that they're now expected to sustain. This generation of near digital natives sees the mixed bag of online versus in-person training and have never really been offered proof that institutionalization actually works, and certainly no examples of a successful institution being built from the ground up. The legacy foundations that support dance and theater might offer their hands to help, but circus as a whole isn't capable of accepting that help in any meaningful way. To accept that help, we would need an established presence in either higher education, philanthropy, or the arts industry. The American Circus Educators Association, for instance, has tried to create some professional guidelines and resources, but its influence remains really limited. Even the smallest amount of guidance around risk management or safety have failed to catch on with the larger schools. And so the social pressure for smaller studios to participate in a larger circus community has never materialized as traditional circus disciplines like aerial arts have expanded into the mainstream. Circus practitioners often prefer autonomy. They see the very idea of standardization as running counter to the spirit of circus. Why should a generational coach in Minneapolis have to adhere to the same risk management practices used by a dancer turned aerialist turned coach who's living in New York? There is also something generational here. Older circus educators grew up suspicious of institutions, and that suspicion got passed down. When the way it's always been done has been passed down through trusted community sources, the outsider institution telling us what to do doesn't sit very well. The result is a community with enormous creativity and resilience, but also one that struggles to imagine structures that could sustain it long term. The COVID-19 lockdowns exposed just how precarious this structure-less model is. Circus schools and studios, many of them small, community-based operations, may not have felt immediate impacts, but are certainly feeling the ripple effects now. Unlike dance studios that could pivot more easily to online instruction, circus training requires specialized equipment, spotters, and consistent practice to maintain skills. As a result, many programs are feeling the pinch a few years out from lockdown. Skills have suffered, online instruction has proliferated, and students don't have the disposable income that they once did. For the first time, the lack of a hub organization has become a real liability. There was no central structure to lobby for circus schools, no collective voice to push for funding or recognition in pandemic relief efforts. Some teachers improvised with online conditioning or small-scale outdoor classes, but the pandemic revealed how vulnerable this decentralized system can be. Complicating matters, the creative economy of the late 2010s, the world of YouTube, Instagram, and indie entrepreneurship that once seemed like it might democratize access, has solidified into a rigid niche economy with some of the most qualified coaches capitalizing on the fact that they can now offer asynchronous video coaching. These video progressions may increase access to technique, but they fail en masse to transfer any sense of connection to an extant circus culture or heritage. And because circus organizations book performances 1 to 3 years out, we're only now in 2025 seeing the first wave of performance programming coming back to fruition. The big schools and companies are still wobbling, and no one seems entirely sure of what's going to happen next. Looking outside the United States can offer some perspective. In Europe, circus has long benefited from robust institutional support. Countries like France, Belgium, and the United Kingdom treat circus conservatories on par with dance and theater schools. In France, the CNAC produces highly trained graduates who often move straight into fully funded companies. Far from flattening creativity, these institutions have created a landscape where a diversity of work can flourish. Traditional and family circuses do still tour, but the training and arts ecosystem has fueled some of the more avant-garde experimental circus of the past few decades. Two of the most influential festivals in the circus world, Cirque de Demain and the Monte Carlo Circus Festival, both flourish with a combination of private and public support. But even with these robust institutions, the European schools and networks seem to be wobbling under the current macroeconomic climate. Canada provides another instructive example. Cirque du Soleil may dominate the cultural imagination, but En Piste, the National Circus Network, built the sustainable advocacy, professional development, and funding pipelines. In Latin America, circus often takes the shape of community and social programs, blending artistry with activism. The governments in Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico have acknowledged circus as both a cultural heritage and a social tool. Brazil, for example, likely has the world's largest integration of circus arts into public school physical education, a worthy goal for us in the United States to kind of strive for. Meanwhile, here in the United States, circus is drifting towards another kind of institutionalization, full commercialization. The mainstreaming of aerial arts, of pole fitness, of partner acrobatics, and even of parkour has stripped away much of their weirdness. That mainstreaming has meant broader access, but also predictable capitalist dynamics, siloing, branding, celebrity-driven markets. In this new ecosystem, circus coaches and founders, the ones with decades of deep teaching practice but no social media following, risk being squeezed out. Students want to train with the Instagram famous, many of whom learned from this OG generation. And the credentials of the OG generation are not always recognizable to newcomers. Without strong institutions to support professional teachers, the field may split between superstar influencers and underpaid side gig instructors, leaving very little room for sustainable careers in between. This is where the lack of a central hub organization can hurt the most. The circus world has no structure for protecting its workers, no systems to ensure knowledge is passed down with integrity. Without the pipelines for institutional knowledge, more and more accidents are bound to happen, and the homogenization of various disciplines become more likely. The irony is that circus itself might offer a blueprint for a different kind of institution. Instead of rigid hierarchies, circus thrives on collaboration, spotters and flyers, clowns and riggers, every role essential but no one fully in control. What if the institutions of the United States could adopt that ethos? Instead of replicating the gatekeeping of other arts industries, circus education could build organizations that are flexible, participatory, and non-hierarchical. Leadership pipelines could be nurtured without erasing autonomy. Professional development could be standardized enough to protect workers, but open enough to honor regional variation. Circus, in other words, doesn't have to fear institutions. It could take the chance to reinvent them. And if it succeeds, other art fields might take notice. Ultimately, the strengths and weaknesses of American circus lie in this ongoing tension between independence and structure. On the one hand, the refusal to be fully institutionalized has kept the field vibrant, unpredictable, and open to anyone curious enough to give it a try. On the other hand, the pandemic and ongoing struggles in the generational handover have shown just how fragile a purely decentralized system can be. Looking at Europe, Canada, and Latin America, one sees that institutions don't have to suffocate circus. They can protect and amplify it. The challenge for the American circus community is to imagine what kind of institutions could exist if built not despite circus values, but because of them. If successful, circus in the United States might be able to chart a new path, not just for itself, but for the very idea of what an arts institution might look like in the 21st century.